I still remember the day I first saw the academy. I was 13 years old, standing on the observation deck of Terra Station with my father, when the holographic recruitment broadcast filled the entire viewing chamber. The image showed a city built among the stars. Spires of crystal and metal twisted toward an alien sky, connected by bridges of light that pulsed with energy. Beings from 100 worlds walked those halls. Ceruleans with their shimmering skin, Cathari with their elegant antennae, Gravitons who drifted slightly above the ground as if the universe itself refused to hold them down. And humans too, wearing the silver and blue uniforms of the Galactic Concord Academy. The narrator's voice spoke of exploration, of diplomacy, of standing at the frontier of known space and pushing it further. It spoke of the Academy's 1,000-year history, of graduates who became ambassadors to nascent civilizations, who discovered new forms of life, who brokered peace between species that had been at war for centuries. I turned to my father, and I remember my voice was barely a whisper. "I'm going to go there someday." He smiled, but it was the sad smile of an adult who knew how cruel the universe could be. "The Academy only accepts the best of the best." "Lyra, I know," I said. "I'm going to be the best." That was the moment the dream was born. And like all dreams that matter, it refused to die quietly, no matter how many times reality tried to strangle it. Looking back now, I realize how innocent the first was. I had no idea what the Academy was really looking for. I thought it was about grades and test scores. I thought it was about being the smartest, the most accomplished, the most dedicated. I was wrong. The Academy was looking for something I had not yet discovered, something that would take me 4 rejections to understand. But that day, standing in the observation deck with starlight painting my face, I was just a girl with a dream. And that was enough to begin. I did not know how many times I would fall. I did not know how much it would hurt. But I knew, with the absolute certainty of youth, that I would keep getting back up. My first application was submitted exactly 1 year later. I was 14, barely within the minimum age range. I had spent that entire year consuming everything I could about the Academy. I read about its history, its traditions, its entrance requirements. I practiced the cognitive aptitude tests until I could complete them in my sleep. I learned the basics of galactic standard, the language of the Concord, even though no 14-year-old on Terra Station had any real need for it. Every night, I fell asleep imagining myself walking those crystal halls, a silver and blue uniform on my shoulders, surrounded by beings from worlds I had only read about. The application itself took me 3 months to complete. There were essays, aptitude declarations, personal statements, character references. I begged my teachers to write me letters of recommendation, and 3 of them did, though I could tell they thought I was aiming too high. One teacher, Mr. Okonkwo, warned me gently that the Academy's acceptance rate was less than 2%. I thanked him and worked harder. I submitted it on the last possible day, my hands trembling over the terminal. The response came 4 weeks later. I watched the notification appear on my personal display, my heart hammering so loudly I could barely think. I opened it with my eyes half closed. "Dear applicant Lyra Chen," it began. "Thank you for your interest in the Galactic Concord Academy. After careful review of your application, we regret to inform you that we are unable to offer you admission at this time. The primary reason for this decision is as follows. Applicant does not meet the minimum age requirement for the standard admission track." I read it 3 times, searching for hidden meanings, for loopholes, but there was nothing. It was a polite way of saying I was too young. I cried for an hour. The tears were hot and angry, the kind that come when you have worked so hard for something and the universe does not care. I cried for the 13-year-old girl who had watched the broadcast and believed, truly believed, That dreams were things you could reach if you just tried hard enough. Then I dried my eyes, opened my calendar, and started planning my next attempt. I would be 14 years, 364 days old at the next deadline. That was not too young. That was exactly the right age. I was not going to let age stop me. I would simply be older next time. And I would be better. Every rejection letter, I told myself, was just another data point, another lesson learned, another step closer to the yes. By the time I turned 15, I had restructured my entire life around the goal of admission. I took every advanced course Terra Station's educational system offered. I studied xenobiology, astropolitics, quantum linguistics, comparative ethics. I joined the station's junior diplomatic corps, the only teenager among a group of adults who tolerated me with bemused patience. I spent my free time in the station's library, reading about academy history, about famous graduates, about the scientific discoveries that had earned their creators a place in the Academy's Hall of Fame. My grades were perfect. My test scores were in the highest percentile across every measurable domain. I even secured a letter of recommendation from Under-Secretary Velix, a Cathari diplomat who had visited the station for trade negotiations. I had impressed him by asking about the ethical implications of first contact protocols with pre-warp civilizations. He had laughed, a sound like wind chimes, and told me I had the mind of a diplomat. The second application was more polished than the first. I had learned that the Academy valued not just academic excellence but demonstrated commitment to the Concord's values. I documented everything, every course, every certificate, every volunteer effort. I wrote essays that I revised dozens of times, each version smoother and more professional than the last. I submitted the application on my 15th birthday, treating it as a gift to my future self. The waiting was worse the second time. I knew I was more qualified. I had done everything right. The rejection arrived on a Tuesday. Dear applicant Lyra Chen, it said. Same formal opening. After careful review of your application, we regret to inform you that we are unable to offer you admission at this time. Your academic scores, while excellent, do not meet the competitive threshold for the current applicant pool. I had scored in the highest percentile. What more could they want? I checked the Academy's published statistics. The average admitted student scored in the 97th percentile. I was in the 99th. The numbers did not make sense. I didn't cry this time. I got angry. I told myself I hadn't worked hard enough, hadn't studied enough, hadn't been enough. But a new thought crept in. What if effort alone was not enough? What if the Academy wanted something I could not study for? I pushed the doubt away and started planning. And next time, I would be. My 16th year was the year of strategic perfection. If the Academy wanted candidates who exceeded expectations, I would exceed them so thoroughly that rejection would be impossible. I enrolled in additional certification programs: Xeno-Diplomatic Mediation, Advanced Stellar Navigation, Cross-Species Conflict Resolution. I learned to speak Cathari and could read Cerulean script, even if I couldn't pronounce it correctly. I volunteered for every station-wide initiative, every cultural exchange program. I also studied the Academy itself. I analyzed admission statistics going back 20 years. I read the personal statements of successful applicants that had been published online. I joined forums where former applicants discussed their experiences. I identified patterns. Successful candidates had unique perspectives, compelling personal narratives that set them apart. So I crafted one. I wrote about growing up on Terra Station, a human girl surrounded by the vastness of space, dreaming of reaching beyond her reach. I wrote about my father, a maintenance engineer who never left the station but taught me to look up at the stars and wonder. I wrote about the moment I saw the Cathari delegation and realized the universe was filled with beings whose thoughts I could not predict, whose experiences I could not imagine, and that this was the most beautiful thing in existence. I thought it was good. I thought it was honest. The rejection came back in 3 weeks. Faster than before, which I later learned was never a good sign. Dear applicant Lyra Chen, it read, your application, while technically excellent, lacks a distinctive perspective that would differentiate you from the broader applicant pool. The Academy values diversity of thought and experience. Lacked a distinctive perspective. I had tried so hard to fit their mold that I had become indistinguishable from everyone else. I stared at that phrase for a long time. That night, I had a long conversation with my father. He didn't offer solutions. He just listened. And when I was done, he said something I would never forget. Lyra, he said, you've been so busy trying to be impressive that you forgot to be yourself. And yourself is actually pretty impressive. I didn't understand what he meant at the time. But I would. His words settled into me like seeds planted in soil, waiting for the right season to grow. It would take another rejection and many sleepless nights before I finally understood what he had been trying to tell me. The year between my third and fourth attempts was the strangest of my life. I stopped trying to be what the Academy wanted and started exploring what I actually cared about. And what I cared about, it turned out, was communication. Not just language, though languages fascinated me, but the deeper question of how beings from completely different evolutionary backgrounds could understand each other. How do you translate a concept that has no equivalent in the other's language? How do you convey emotion when your facial expressions come from different evolutionary paths? I spent entire nights lying awake, turning these questions over in my mind, finding joy in the complexity. I became obsessed with xenolinguistics. I studied the theoretical frameworks of first contact communication protocols. I read the works of Dr. Helena Vance, the human linguist who developed the initial communication matrix for the gravitan species. I practiced with translation AI, learning to spot the subtle errors that machines made when trying to bridge conceptual gaps between species. For the first time, I wasn't studying to impress anyone. I was studying because the questions genuinely fascinated me. I spent hours in the station's xenocultural archives, reading about diplomatic encounters that had gone wrong because of a mistranslated gesture, a misinterpreted silence. One account described a peace negotiation that collapsed because one party interpreted the other's respectful silence as hostile disinterest. A single cultural misunderstanding had prolonged a war by 3 years. It was liberating. I had spent 3 years trying to become someone else's idea of a perfect candidate. And in letting that go, I finally found what I actually loved. My father noticed the change. He said I seemed lighter, more present. I was still determined to join the Academy, but the desperation had faded. I had discovered that my worth was not determined by an admissions committee. The universe was vast, and there were many paths through it. That discovery would prove essential, because the fourth rejection was the cruelest of all. My mother died when I was 9 years old. She was a xenobotanist, studying the flora of a distant moon when her research station lost atmospheric containment. The Academy had trained her. The Academy had sent her there. And the Academy had honored her memory with a plaque in their Hall of Fallen Researchers. I had never told any of my applications about her. I thought it would seem like I was trying to gain sympathy. Or worse, that I was carrying a grudge against the institution that had sent her to her death. But the truth was more complicated. I didn't blame the Academy. I blamed the universe for being dangerous. I blamed myself for being too young to have known her better. But her legacy was part of why I wanted to go. She had believed in the Academy's mission. She had believed that understanding other worlds, other species, other forms of life was worth any risk. I had a memory of her. The last time I saw her before she left on that final mission. She had knelt down to my level and said, "Lyra, the universe is filled with things that want to be understood. Go find them." I hadn't thought about that memory in years. But as I prepared my fourth application, it came back to me with startling clarity. Maybe I wasn't just applying for myself. Maybe I was carrying something forward. Something that had started before I was born. I didn't put any of this in my personal statement. It felt too private, too raw, but it was there, underneath every word I wrote. A quiet current pulling me forward. My mother had believed in this place. I needed to see it for myself, to understand what she had given her life for. My fourth personal statement was not crafted. It poured out of me in a single evening of inspired writing. I wrote about the terror and beauty of trying to understand a mind that thinks in completely different categories than yours. I wrote about the humility required to admit you might be wrong about something as basic as what a smile means. I wrote about my father, who had never left the station but who understood people better than anyone I had ever met. Because he listened without assuming he already knew what they would say. I submitted it without revisions. For the first time, I didn't care if it was perfect. It was true. I waited. I didn't count the days. I continued my xeno-linguistic studies. Learned 3 new dialects of Cathari. Started documenting the gestural language of the Aquilans who had recently established a diplomatic presence on the station. I was doing the work I loved, and the academy had become secondary. 3 weeks later, the rejection arrived. "Dear applicant Lyra Chen," it said, "after careful review of your application, we regret to inform you that we are unable to offer you admission at this time. Due to interstellar budget reductions mandated by the Concord Assembly, the Academy's incoming class has been reduced by 60%. This reduction has necessitated difficult decisions, and many highly qualified applicants, yourself included, could not be accommodated." I couldn't believe it. They hadn't rejected me because I wasn't good enough. They had rejected me because the galaxy's economic policy had collided with my dreams. There was nothing I could have done differently. No amount of preparation could overcome a 60% reduction in class size. I sat in my room for 3 days. I didn't eat properly. I didn't talk to anyone except my father, and even then only in monosyllables. For the first time, I seriously considered giving up. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every decision I had made, wondering if I had wasted 4 years chasing something that was never meant to be mine. The universe had given me a clear sign. I thought, it was time to let go. But letting go is harder than holding on. When the thing you hold is a dream. The days blurred together. I stopped tracking time. I slept when I was tired, ate when I was hungry, but nothing had flavor. The station's corridors became a labyrinth I walked without purpose, my feet carrying me through routines that no longer meant anything. My father tried. He cooked my favorite meals, left them outside my door. He suggested we watch the old holodramas we used to enjoy together. I appreciated the effort, but I couldn't muster the energy to care. What hurt most was the randomness of the rejection. The first 3 had taught me lessons. They had pointed to specific things I could improve. But the 4th rejection taught me nothing except that the universe was unfair. Budget cuts, politics, economic policies decided by beings who had never heard of Lyra Chen. Who would never know that their decision had crushed a 17-year-old girl's dream. I spent a lot of time in the observation deck, watching ships come and go. Each one carried someone somewhere, pursuing something, and I was stuck, frozen, unable to move forward or backward. I watched a freighter dock and unload cargo from Proxima. I watched a diplomatic shuttle depart for the Cathari homeworld. I watched a young family board a transport for Earth. The children excited, the parents exhausted. Everyone had somewhere to be. Everyone except me. It was there, in the quiet hum of the station's life support systems, under the indifferent light of distant stars, that I finally accepted a truth I had been avoiding. I could not control whether the Academy wanted me. I could only control whether I wanted myself. And I realized, with a clarity that felt like breaking glass, that I did. I wanted myself. I wanted the girl who had tried 4 times. I wanted her stubbornness, her hope, her refusal to stay down. Even if the Academy never accepted her, that girl was worth something. It took me another week to get out of bed and start living again. But I did it, and when I finally logged back into the Academy's admissions portal, it was not to check for updates. It was to search for alternatives. That was when I found the Independent Research Fellowship. Despair is not a single emotion. It erodes you slowly until you forget what it felt like to believe in something. I stopped checking the Academy's recruitment feeds. I stopped practicing Galactic Standard. I deleted the countdown calendar I had kept since I was 13. The one that counted the days until the next application deadline. I told myself it was freeing. But letting go felt like dying. Without the Academy, I didn't know who I was. Just a 17-year-old girl on a space station, good at tests and fluent in languages no one around her spoke. My father watched with quiet patience. He didn't push. He just made sure I ate. Made sure I left my room occasionally. One evening, he found me staring out the observation window at the stars. He stood beside me without speaking for a long time. Finally he said, "Do you remember when you were 10 and you wanted to build a ship that could fly to the moons of Kepler?" I nodded. I had spent months on that project. Cardboard and scrap metal and dreams. "You failed 17 times before you got it to hover for 3 seconds. He said, "And you celebrated each failure like it was a step forward. Because you knew it was." I closed my eyes. "This feels different," I whispered. "Does it?" He put his hand on my shoulder. "Failure only wins when you stop trying. The Academy has rejected you 4 times. But you're still here. You're still you. And that Lyra, the one who refuses to give up, is worth more than any acceptance letter." On the 4th day, a message arrived from Under-Secretary Velix. He had heard about my rejections. "Lyra," his message began, "I applied to the Cathari Institute of Diplomatic Arts 7 times. 7 times I was rejected. I was told my thought patterns were too linear. My emotional expression too rigid. On my 8th attempt, I was accepted, not because I changed who I was, but because the Institute changed what it was looking for. Rejection is often about factors you cannot control. It is not a verdict on your worth." I read his words several times. 7 rejections. If Velix could endure 7 and still become one of the most respected diplomats in the Concord, surely I could endure 4. The message helped, but I still didn't know what to do next. I couldn't keep submitting the same kind of application and expect different results. I spent the next few days walking the station's corridors, watching the ships come and go, thinking about all the different paths a life could take. Maybe I didn't need the Academy. Maybe I could find my own way, chart my own course through the stars. That night, I dreamed of the broadcast I had seen 4 years ago. The spires of crystal and metal. The beings from 100 worlds. And I woke up knowing I wasn't done yet. But I also knew I couldn't keep doing the same thing. If the Academy kept rejecting me, maybe I needed to find a different door entirely. The Galactic Concord Academy had a program I had never seriously considered. It was called the Independent Research Fellowship, designed for candidates who didn't fit the traditional mold. It accepted applicants who proposed original research projects aligned with the Academy's mission. It didn't require the standard entrance exams. It didn't care about academic scores in the traditional sense. All it required was a compelling research proposal and a faculty sponsor. I discovered the IRF while digging through the Academy's administrative archives late one night. Unable to sleep, I had been avoiding everything related to the Academy. But something pulled me back. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was just stubbornness. The IRF was buried in a subsection of the Academy's website. Barely advertised. It was as if they didn't want most applicants to find it. But I had always been good at finding things that were hidden. I had 4 years of rejection letters. I also had a deep knowledge of xenolinguistics and cross-species communication. And I had an idea that had been forming in my mind for months. The biggest gap in current xenolinguistic theory was the assumption that communication is primarily about transmitting information. But what if it's fundamentally about vulnerability? About the willingness to be changed by what you learn? I spent 2 weeks refining the idea. I read everything I could find about vulnerability theory in psychology, sociology, even theology. I mapped out a research methodology, identified case studies, drafted timelines. For the first time in months, I felt alive. I wrote a research proposal titled Vulnerability as a Communication Framework in Cross-Species Diplomacy. It was the most ambitious thing I had ever written. It proposed analyzing historical first contact scenarios through the lens of vulnerability theory. I needed a faculty sponsor. I reached out to Dr. Helena Vance herself, the legendary linguist who had cracked the graviton communication matrix. I sent her my proposal with a cover letter explaining my history of rejections. I expected silence. I got a response within 48 hours. I nearly dropped my datapad when I saw her name in my inbox. Dr. Helena Vance, the foremost authority on cross-species communication, had read my proposal, and she wanted to talk to me. Your proposal is provocative and slightly infuriating. Dr. Vance wrote, you are arguing that my life's work is built on an incomplete foundation. I disagree, but I cannot deny your argument has merit. I would like to discuss this further. That Tuesday, I had the most intellectually stimulating conversation of my life. Dr. Vance challenged every assumption in my proposal. She poked holes in my arguments, questioned my conclusions, and through it all, I defended my ideas with everything I had. At the end of the 2-hour call, she said, you're wrong about several things. But you're wrong in interesting ways. I'll sponsor your application. I submitted the IRF application the next day, my 5th attempt to join the Academy. And for the first time, I felt like I was applying as myself. Not as the person I thought they wanted, but as the person I actually was. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Dr. Vance gave me a reading list that would take a normal person 2 years to complete. She also assigned a preliminary research task. Analyze 3 historical first contact scenarios using my vulnerability framework and submit my findings within 6 weeks. I threw myself into the work completely. I read case studies of the disastrous first contact with the Threxian collective, where a mistranslated greeting nearly sparked an interstellar conflict. I analyzed the Fellerin peace process, where a single diplomat's willingness to show vulnerability de-escalated a situation everyone thought would end in war. I studied the first communication with the graviton species, looking for the moments where Dr. Vance's matrix had succeeded and the moments where it had almost failed. The work was consuming. It was also the happiest I had been in years. I was doing what I was meant to do. I would wake up eager to get back to my analysis, my mind already turning over problems and possibilities before I had even opened my eyes. Each case study revealed new layers of complexity, new questions I had not thought to ask. The work was endless, and I loved it. Each scenario revealed something new. The Threxian case taught me that precision without empathy is dangerous. The Fellerin peace process showed that vulnerability is not weakness, but a strategic choice. The Gravitan communication demonstrated that even the best frameworks have limits. I wrote my findings in a document that grew longer each day. I cross-referenced, questioned my own assumptions, rewrote sections from scratch. My father would bring me meals and find me exactly where he had left me hours earlier, surrounded by data pads and notes. 6 weeks later, I submitted my findings to Dr. Vance. She responded with a single sentence. "This is acceptable. I will forward it to the IRF committee." Days turned into weeks. The decision deadline came and went. I checked my messages obsessively at first, then less often, then not at all. The waiting had become part of my life. Like breathing. I tried not to hope. But hope, I had learned, was not something you could control. It existed whether you wanted it or not. A stubborn weed growing through the cracks of even the most carefully constructed defenses. I stopped fighting it. I let myself hope. I let myself imagine what it would feel like to finally hear yes. And I let myself be okay with the possibility of hearing no again. The weeks that followed were the longest of my life. Not because I was anxious, though I was, but because I had finally found something I truly cared about. And I was terrified of losing it before it even began. Every notification on my terminal made my heart jump. Every silence felt like a verdict. I kept working. That was the only thing that helped. I continued my analysis of the first contact scenarios, refining my framework, testing it against new cases. I found that my vulnerability theory explained patterns that traditional communication matrices could not. The moments where diplomacy succeeded were almost always moments where someone had been willing to be vulnerable first. I started writing a paper about my findings. Not for the academy but for myself. I wanted to capture what I was learning before it slipped away. I wrote about the Threxian collective, about how their concept of honor was so different from human honor that early translators had mapped the wrong word entirely. The Cathari word for honor implied rigidity, standing firm. The Threxian word implied flexibility, bending without breaking. A single mistranslation had nearly started a war. My father would check on me occasionally, bringing cups of tea and asking gentle questions about my work. He never mentioned the academy, never asked if I had heard anything. He understood that the waiting was its own kind of torture, and that talking about it would only make it worse. I thought about what I would do if the IRF rejected me too. 5 rejections. Would I try a 6th time? Would I give up and find another path? I didn't have answers. All I had was the work, and the stubborn conviction that I was on to something important. The universe, I had learned, does not care about your timeline. It moves at its own pace, indifferent to your hopes and fears. The only thing you can control is whether you keep moving forward. So I kept working, and I waited. I told myself that whatever happened, I had already won. I had found my question. I had found my voice. The academy was just a place. The work was the thing that mattered. The message arrived on a Thursday morning. I was analyzing a Cerulean diplomatic text, trying to understand how their concept of shared obligation mapped onto human ethical frameworks. My terminal chimed. It was from the Galactic Concord Academy, IRF Admissions Committee. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. "Dear applicant Lyra Chen," it began. The same opening as the rejections. My heart sank. "After careful review of your independent research fellowship application, including your research proposal and preliminary work submitted through your sponsor, the committee has reached the following decision." I closed my eyes. "We are pleased to inform you that your application has been approved. Welcome to the Galactic Concord Academy. I read the sentence 7 times. 7. Because that was the number of times I had tried. 7. Because it was the Cathari number for transformation. I sat in silence for a long moment. I thought about my father, who had never doubted me. About Undersecretary Velix, whose 7 rejections had given me perspective. About Dr. Vance, who had sponsored a radical idea from a 17-year-old with a history of rejection. I thought about each rejection. The first taught me patience. The second taught me humility. The third taught me authenticity. The fourth taught me that sometimes failure has nothing to do with you. And the fifth taught me there is always another door. I saved the acceptance letter. Then went to find my father. He was in the maintenance bay, running diagnostics on a life support regulator. I walked in, and he looked up at my face and knew before I said a word. "You got in," he said, not a question. "They accepted me for the IRF. I'm going to the academy." He set down his tools and crossed the room. He hugged me. A real hug. The kind that says everything words cannot. "I'm proud of you, Lyra," he said. "Not because you got in. Because you never stopped being yourself. Even when the universe told you that yourself wasn't enough." I held on to those words. They meant more to me than the acceptance letter itself. Because they were not about the academy. They were about me. The transport ship was called the Constant Star. It was small. Nothing like the majestic academy shuttles from the broadcasts. Just a beaten-up freighter with passenger quarters bolted onto the hull. But it was real. And it was taking me where I needed to go. I sat by the viewport as Terra Station receded behind us, growing smaller until it was just a point of light among countless others. My father's last words echoed. "Don't forget where you came from. But don't be afraid to become who you're meant to be." The journey took 3 days. I spent most of it in my quarters, reading through my research notes, preparing for the work ahead. I also spent a lot of time just staring out at the stars, thinking about everything that had brought me here. The academy's spires came into view on the 3rd day. They were even more beautiful than I remembered. Crystal and metal, bridges of light, beings from 100 worlds moving through the halls. The holographic broadcast I had seen at 13 had not done it justice. As the ship docked, I thought about all the applicants who would be rejected this year. All the dreamers who would receive those form letters. Who would feel the sting of not being chosen. I wanted to tell them what I had learned. That rejection is not the end of your story. It is just a chapter. And sometimes the chapters that hurt the most are the ones that make the ending worth reaching. I had not yet met my faculty advisor. I had not yet begun my research. I was nobody at the Galactic Concord Academy. A 17-year-old girl with more rejections than accomplishments. But I had a proposal. I had a sponsor. I had a question worth answering. And I had never stopped believing that I belonged among the stars. I stepped off the transport ship and onto the platform of the academy. I took my first breath of air that had been recycled through 100 different lungs. Each from a being who had traveled across the galaxy to be here. The air smelled faintly of metal and flowers. The sounds of 100 languages filled the docking bay. I saw ceruleans and Cathari and gravitans and humans. All moving with purpose. All part of something larger than themselves. I thought of the observation deck on Terra Station. Of the 13-year-old girl watching a holographic broadcast with stars in her eyes. She had been right to dream. She just hadn't known how many doors she would need to knock on before one finally opened. The journey had taken 5 years. 4 formal rejections, countless smaller setbacks, and more tears than I care to count. But each tear had watered something. Each rejection had taught me something. But I had made it. I took a deep breath. The air was cool and clean, different from the recycled atmosphere of Terra Station. It smelled like possibility. A Cathari student walked past me. her antennae bobbing in what I recognized as a friendly greeting. I nodded back, not knowing if I had interpreted the gesture correctly, but willing to try. I was home, and my journey was just beginning.